Welcome to the Unlist. Today we are talking about patchouli, but not the subject patchouli, just patchouli fragrances in my collection. Yes, that's right, it's another show and tell video. Hooray! We get to talk about things in my collection that I own. Nobody cares. Nobody's going to watch it. Too bad. I'm making it anyway. So, this show and tell time video is basically the patchouli version of the My Vetiverse video I made several episodes back, because we are chugging through August and things are going to start getting cooler soon, so I might as well start talking about things that are for cooler weather. Patchouli is definitely one of those. You don't really want to wear heavy patchouli fragrances in the dead of summer. It's not a good idea. So, just like with vetiver, how I have pure vetiver oil at my disposal, just right here, same thing is true for patchouli. I have raw patchouli oil right here. And this stuff is like the litmus against patchouli fragrances to tell me just how patchouli my patchouli is, right? And when you smell uncut patchouli like this, you really get an idea of the complexity of the material. Every facet of patchouli that you smell in patchouli fragrances is all together in the oil. So the camphoraceous side, the green, the woodiness, the dirtiness, the earth, the muskiness, and of course that chocolate nuance that people often talk about when they smell patchouli. All of it's here. All of it. Absolutely all of it. And one of the reasons why they've made a million different isolates from patchouli is there's a million different directions you can take the material in. And we get things like patchoulol and akagala wood and all these other things that create different vibes from the material. Using patchouli in its raw form in a perfume is typically avoided these days. It's not necessarily like it's avoided because it's not popular. People love patchouli. It's avoided because it's all or nothing when you use the raw oil. If you only want certain aspects, it becomes really difficult. You have to start finding ways of building the fragrance up by putting certain materials in that de-emphasize certain aspects of patchouli while boosting others. It's like how animalic musks are really hard to work with because you want to emphasize some aspects and de-emphasize others. Well, that's how patchouli is. So a lot of modern fragrances use portions of it and not all of it. So getting on to the actual fragrances in my collection, I'm not going to say a whole lot about each one because obviously I have like 35 minutes at most to really discuss these, and I have a lot of fragrances to get through. Many of these I've mentioned in other videos, so they don't deserve a long, drawn-out spiel. But I'm going to kick it off right by mentioning, obviously, what is for some people the king of patchouli fragrances, none other than Gioveni Gentleman from 1974. Now, compared to raw patchouli oil, you can really smell where they started to try and deviate from that with this fragrance. It still has some chocolatey nuances. It still has some of the earthiness, dirtiness, but the way they built this up into a chypre with oak moss and geranium and musks like civet, bergamot, other materials, you can tell that they were trying to really polish and sharpen patchouli accord, to tame it, if you will, to make it more urbane is the word I'm going to use here, less like the jungle and more like the concrete jungle. And because by 1974 we were moving away from the hippie era, from the summer of love, counterculture. Okay, we're moving into the 70s now, so things were getting more along the lines of high popped collars and feathered hair, and everyone was strutting their stuff. They were trying to look more put together, more dressed up, right? They weren't trying to just run around basically in tank tops with flowers in their hair, right? They wanted to actually have some structure to them in the 70s. So what better way to communicate that than to take patchouli and effectively tame it into a man's fragrance, which is what they did here. It's still a little bit wild. It's still a little bit crazy. But that's why we love it, right? That's why we love it. Now, its counterpoint would come a decade later, but 10 years later, we would see the counterpoint to the Gioveni Gentleman in the form of Giorgio Beverly Hills For Man. Now, I know some of you are going to give me shit because this is not the deep vintage brown juice. This is the green juice that came out in like the early 2000s, I think, when they reissued this. But 20 years later, basically. But I don't care. I've smelled the deep vintage. This smells nearly just as good, okay? This has oak moss in it, in the ingredients, so it's got mossiness. But the real counterpoint, why this is a counterpoint to the Givenchy, is this moves more towards benzoin and vanilla. They don't go down the civet rabbit hole. They don't go down the animalic rabbit hole. They polish the patchouli in a different sense. They use vanilla, they use benzoin, they use styrax, they use other materials to really make this feel just even more sophisticated and even more genteel, okay? Where there's a little bit of growl in the Givenchy, a little bit of sex appeal, that's gone. There's really no sex appeal in this fragrance. This is boardroom, this is power broker, this is the Gordon Gekko of the patchouli world, and thus it can have no play. It's all business, and it makes it a bit more wearable, I guess, a little easier to pull off. The Givenchy with all the musks going on, it's a bit of a hard sell if you're in polite company. I still love it, but it is what it is. This is probably a better choice for you in that situation. Then we can go to something that's really, really strange. Strange and not very loved, honestly. Not very loved. And it is Mont Pachuli, 2009, by Raymond Monagal. First of all, Raymond Monagal is a bit of a controversial perfumer because he was creative director at Marugia. I'm guessing once they were bought by Coty or L'Oreal or whoever owns them and then shut down, more or less, he was out of a job. And he comes from that commercial perfume world. So even though he went into a niche brand, launched his own house, he really comes from that sort of Paco Rabanne mindset of it's got to be commercially viable, it's got to be mass appeal. And he does experiment and play around and do niche things, but all of his fragrances have this commercial glaze to them. And that's just ingrained in him because that's the world he came from. It's like when Alberto Morillas launched his own line. It's like when a lot of these big industry perfumers launch their own bespoke lines, they still end up being very commercial. That's the world they lived in. And that's sort of how this works. This particular fragrance, Mont Pachuli 2009, the inkwell bottle is really cool, but the smell of it really wrinkles some people's nose because he uses a lot of fruity, sort of what I call fruit chuli materials in the opening. He uses a lot of like these galaxolide style musks. He uses the big sort of framboinon berry materials. He uses just these big sweet fruity accords that you would find in your typical Versace fragrance, your typical Paco Rabanne fragrance. And then at the very bottom of it, you get down to the earthy, woody patchouli, oak moss. Actual oak moss is in this. So it's like taking a Gucci Guilty fragrance and then layering it over patchouli oil. In essence, you're taking a Gucci Guilty fragrance and layering it over patchouli oil, and that just weirds people out. It shouldn't work, and by rights I shouldn't like this, but it's just so bizarre and how it's 1 foot in and 1 foot out that I do actually enjoy it. Speaking of Gucci Guilty, that leads me to Gucci Guilty Intense from 2011. This launched the same year as the original Gucci Guilty, which is here. But whereas this is a cleaner, more soapy fragrance, fruity fragrance, the Intense version, which is sadly discontinued, really goes more into the woodiness and the patchouli of the composition. And Jacques Houselier, who composed the original, this one, Black and O, so the original 3 flankers, who is also the guy behind Amen, by the way, which we'll be covering up pretty soon. But so this is more patchouli forward. You still get the fruitiness, you still get the juniper berry, you still get a little bit of bubblegum up top, all the Gucci guiltiness that you could love. But again, it lays heavier on the patchouli. So ultimately, it dries down to patchouli. And the thing about me and patchouli fragrances is a patchouli fragrance doesn't have to be all about patchouli. Just like a vetiver fragrance can also have twists and turns in it that eventually lead you to the subject. That's how I see patchouli. So a lot of the things that I call patchouli fragrances, you guys may not, because you may see it as a more abstract fragrance. But ultimately, what you're left with in the finish, what you smell on your skin for the majority of the wear, is what the fragrance is about. That's why a chypre is a chypre, a fougere is a fougere, whether it's got pineapple up top or lavender or whatever's going on, you know, whether it's aldehydes or whether it's leather, chypre is a chypre. So for me, a patchouli fragrance is still a patchouli fragrance, whether it has fruitiness in the opening or bergamot, or sticks with the more traditional presentation of just focusing on the green facets of the plant itself. So when you get a little more wild and crazy and you begin adding things to the patchouli to put twists and turns on the path to your destination, that to me doesn't disqualify it from what it is. And in this case, I consider Gucci Guilty Intense to be a patchouli fragrance, since it ultimately ends in patchouli. They replaced this fragrance with this one. Eau de Parfum in 2020. This is what really replaced Intense, and it is not. It's not anything like Intense. It's a whole different fragrance, and because it's not a patchouli fragrance, I'm not going to really discuss it. But I like it. It's good, but it's just not the same. Now, next up, we are going to discuss this one right here. Puli Mania 2023 by Essential Parfums, perfumed by Fabrice Pellegrin. This is a very slept-on fragrance. I think because most people are just so obsessed with Bois Imperial. Or don't get me wrong, I love Bois Imperial. I think most people who like this brand, they like Bois Imperial. It's a very good smelling fragrance. But, you know, there's more to the house than this. I've done a video on the house, but I didn't own this fragrance when I did the original video. So this is a more recent addition to my collection. And Puli Mania is fantastic. It tries to lean slightly into the gourmand side of patchouli without fully committing. So if you're someone who doesn't want to go full gourmand, you don't want to go full L'Instant de Guerlain, okay, you don't want to go L'Instant de Guerlain, you don't want to go Coco Rico, you don't want to go Amen, right? You want to lean more into the green side, but you want some of the gourmand aspects. So you want the green, the camphor, the woodiness, but you wouldn't mind a little bit of cocoa. You wouldn't mind a little bit of vanilla. You wouldn't mind a little bit of hazelnut, but still green. So 1 foot in, 1 foot out. That nice balanced approach. A little bit of the modernity, but also the tradition. Tradition and modernity actually meeting hand in hand for a change. Then guess what? This is your new favorite fragrance right here. And it's one of mine, actually. I love this stuff. And it comes on a little sweet, a little spicy, okay? But then once it dries down, you get the woodiness. You feel the camphor. You actually feel the camphor a little later. Not in the beginning. You feel the camphor a little later in the wear. So it hits you with the gourmand stuff first, and then it eases you into the green stuff later. Because it's really, really well done fragrance. I'm kind of gobsmacked that, like I said, more people don't give that a shot. Everyone is so dead set on Bois Imperial, which again is a good fragrance, but it's a lot of stuff from Essential Parfums that's being slept on, and that's one of them. So, you know, it is what it is, though. So next up, after that one, we are going to skip over to another patchouli fragrance. This one probably not so obviously a patchouli fragrance, but one that is still, in my opinion, worth time. And it is the good old venerable Lapidos Pone from 1987. Yeah, people don't really think of this as being a patchouli fragrance, but once it dries down, can't make it any more clear than that. It's a patchouli fragrance. So this has a lot of commonality with Kouros by Yves Saint Laurent because it has a similar musky, soapy profile, except this one plays more with carnation, has a bit more of a fruitiness to it. It's not as fruity as the Mont Pachuli example that I named a few minutes ago, but definitely has a fruitiness to it. And you can sort of say that this is kind of the beginning of the clubber. Because this fragrance walked, we would later see things like Lamal and Nico's Sculpture, and eventually leading us all the way up through things like 1 Million. So those fragrances could run because this one walked, right? This one is obviously not as sweet or as cloying as today's clubbing fragrances. This is not Versace Eros, but you do get a big smack of patchouli in this, and oak moss too. But whereas Kouros is definitely more into the animalic side of things, into the oak moss side of things, into more of the chypre side of things. This leans a little more heavily into patchouli, so that's why I categorize this as a patchouli fragrance. And it's obviously one of my favorites. I love it to death. So this is one of those must-smell things that you should always get your nose on, even if you don't end up buying it yourself. Now, there's some people that say Lord by Al Rahab smells very similar to this, and I would agree, but Lord is much woodier than this. So this is more patchouli. So I can say to you that if you don't like the patchouli, and you wish that Lapidos Pone was more leaning into wood, then I could say get the Lord by Al Rahab. That'll be better for you. Now, moving right along, we will talk about this little guy right here. Another one of my favorites. Another fragrance that I think is probably not talked about enough. The brand in general is not talked about enough. Similar to Essential Parfums, everyone focuses on Bois Imperial. This Murdoch of London. Now it's Murdoch Barbers of London, but the old bottles were Murdoch of London without the word barbers thrown in there. But however you call it, Murdoch of London, doesn't really matter. These guys are trying to be like the millennial Gen Z version of Trumpers, Penhaligons when they used to have a barbershop. Penhaligons is just a niche brand now, but what Penhaligons used to be, right, and what Geoff Trumper still is, this brand is trying to be a more modern take on that. Still traditional London gentleman barbershop with the groomed beard and the wooden floors and the hot towels and that whole thing. Same vibe, but the fragrances are conservative but a little more modern. So you're not going to get all of the exercises in staunch pepper and dry citrus that you would get with a lot of the Trumper fragrances and a lot of the older Penhaligon fragrances. And while I think all of Murdoch's stuff is really good, I've done a video about them. This one in particular, Patchouli, is one of my favorites because this is a much more camphoraceous take on patchouli. You don't get modern patchouli fragrances that lean this far into the camphor, into the whole terpenous aspect of patchouli. Usually modern fragrances steer away from that because everyone wants the chocolatey, everyone wants the woody, everyone wants the more, what I said earlier, they want the more civilized, they want the more tamped down take of patchouli. This goes more into the green, into the thick of things. So it's got black pepper, it's got a lot of geranium. The geranium makes it sparkle, and obviously it has oak moss, and it just is a very green, sharp, almost pungent patchouli, right? When you think of head shop patchouli oil, which is really heavy on the camphor, the terpenes, not the pure patchouli oil that I have, but like the stuff that you buy from gas stations where it's cut with something, it's not straight patchouli oil. That stuff, that head shop stuff, this is kind of closer to that for me because of that big camphor note, the big pungent sharpness, and the geranium really lends into that. People unfairly compare this to Terre d'Hermes, and I don't see it. I feel like anything with geranium and patchouli gets mistaken for Terre d'Hermes, which is just, you know, frag bros and the frag com sharing a single brain cell is what that is. Okay, it's guys with no critical thinking going at everything, right? They see a thing, oh, it's a clone of something, oh, it's going to be a copy. No, it's not. Okay, so let's just dispel that right now. Unfortunately, though, the problem with Murdoch fragrances in general is they don't have the greatest bottle quality. I'm seeing this now with the shroud. The shroud doesn't like staying over the sprayer at all. So when I lift the cap up, it tries to take the shroud with it, and I don't like that. But, you know, I can forgive it because they're handmade bottles. It's a very small-time brand. They're not manufacturing their stuff in, like, Firmenich or places like that. Now, the next patchouli fragrance on my list is going to be another one that's probably going to surprise you a little bit. But for those who know about patchouli, you'll definitely see it. You'll recognize it. And it is none other than JayZ Gold, a discontinued fragrance, originally released in 2008. This was at the time when Parlux was doing basically fragrances for all the rappers. They did fragrances for Sean Combs, who obviously got into a lot of trouble recently, so wouldn't recommend wearing any of his stuff. But they also did stuff for Rocawear, and they did some JayZ fragrances. And This one, when it came out, was heavily compared to 1 Million. A bit unfair because 1 Million is more of a Tonka fragrance, more of a musky, sweet Tonka with tobacco traces and big blood orange on top. This is more of a patchouli fragrance. This really begins with patchouli, and it has this very novel blueberry accord. You don't get too many blueberry accords in fragrances, let alone men's fragrances, so that automatically makes this pretty unique. But so you get that blueberry accord, you get some spices, you get some Tonka in here, and there's going to be some similar, what I call modernisms in this fragrance, but it does settle down to patchouli, and it's quite nice, and it's clean, a little bit fruity. And does it smell like gold? I don't really know necessarily, but it's one that I think got a lot of hate when it came out. Now that it's discontinued, there are people who probably love it and scalp it and say it's a masterpiece and it's misunderstood and all this crazy stuff. I'm not saying any of that. I'm not going to try and gaslight you. That would be unfair. But I definitely think it was certainly underappreciated. Wasn't appreciated as much as it could be. Now, another patchouli fragrance that I really enjoy, that I think a lot of you guys should also give a try. I only have a small bottle of this, so I can't really show you a big honking bottle like I have everything else so far. But this guy right here, and he's an older bottle, so bottles from this brand don't look like this anymore. But this is Karma by Lush. Now all of the Lush fragrances have this singular white label look like this. This is what the newer Lush bottles look like. And I've got some 100 mils up there too that I have. So, and it's funny because these have expiration dates on them, but they don't expire. Perfume doesn't expire, guys. So anybody who bought these and threw them out on the expiration date, they're just wasting their money. This still smells amazing to me. Now, the thing that makes Karma a very iconic fragrance is back when Lush wasn't quite so popular yet, they were still kind of starting out. A lot of the alternative rock people, like Michael Stipe from REM, Chris Cornell from Soundgarden, Eddie Vedder, Pearl Jam, a lot of those guys, Billy Corgan, Melissa Etheridge, a lot of that, 90s alt rock, grunge / indie rock stuff, those guys, they were Lushies. They were fans of Lush, which is what you call a Lush fan. You call them a Lushie. And one of the big things they all liked was Karma. They didn't really have proper perfumes back then. They just had roll-ons and bar soap and different things. But the smell of Karma was iconic. And eventually they came out with liquid perfume. And when they came out with liquid perfume, like this, they were in little like clay pots, little black pots. I used to have some of those. I used them up and they're gone now. Then they moved to the square bottles like this, and then they changed to the white labels and got rid of all these fancy prints. These fancy prints were cool, but I guess they were too hippy-dippy and they wanted to modernize a bit. But there's nothing modern about this. This is literally like the 1960s patchouli fragrances. So it is sweet orange oil and patchouli, and basically nothing else. You get a little bit of lavender in here, a little bit of pine in here, some lemongrass, and then that's it. You get orange oil and patchouli oil. So that's what you buy this for, man. You want to smell like orange and patchouli, which was a very popular combination, in the 60s. Back when they were just taking literally orange oil and patchouli oil and then just layering them together and putting them on their skin. And all the hippies smelled like this. So when most people say, ew, patchouli stinks, they're talking about this. They're not talking about straight patchouli by itself. They're talking about this. But again, if you want to smell like every like guy with pink heart glasses you've ever met who burns incense and listens to the Grateful Dead or Jimi Hendrix, every like Fish fan that there ever was, you know, you want to smell like that guy who drives like a Volkswagen Beetle or one of the Volkswagen minibuses they had, or you just, you know, that's the stereotype. You want to smell like Shaggy, like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo and the gang. This is what you want. You want this fragrance, and a tiny little bottle like this is all you need, because pure parfum. Okay, so we're talking like 30% oil. You don't need more. You just don't need more. I mean, look at how much I've gone through. And this bottle was from 2017. This is almost 10 years old, and I've barely cut into it. So yeah, it's, you could buy a big one if you think you're going to use it, but I don't think so. So there we go. Patchouli fragrances. Now let's talk about one more that I greatly love and greatly appreciate. We'll wrap it up right here. So this one is another more direct patchouli fragrance. Sort of like how I started this video with Gioveni Gentleman and Giorgio. I'm coming full circle to that style of fragrance, back to those really sort of direct patchouli fragrances. And we are capping it off with Moods Uomo by Crizia, which this came out real late in the game. This came out in like 1988 or 89, and it is very much that style of patchouli, where the patchouli is front and center. I've got a little mini of it right here too that was given to me, which is how I know I like it, why I bought the full bottle. But yeah, this stuff is, it's not very different from Givenchy or Giorgio. The biggest difference between this and those really is the fact that the Moods has more carnation. See, that's the thing, is they all have their own little twist. Givenchy Gentleman, the big twist is the animalics, right? It's the civet. The big twist in the Giorgio is the vanilla and the benzoin, which smooths it over. The big shebang with Moods is carnation. It adds big plunk of carnation and a tiny bit of rose. So it feels more dandy than the other two. It feels more dandy, a little more spandex, a little more teased up hair, right? But Crizia was that kind of house. They were very ostentatious. So in the 80s, they were very, very, very notorious for their styles, let's put it mildly. But a fragrance like this doesn't surprise me when you smell the other Crizia fragrances that were out at that time, like Teatro alla Scala and the original Crizia Uomo, and just all the others they have. Crazy Crizia. It's the house kind of wears its the house wears its eccentric behavior on its sleeve. You know, it doesn't hide it. Same way with Moschino. Really, Moschino's kind of a little goofy as well. So there you guys have it. Patchouli fragrances, my favorite ones. There are other ones I could have mentioned that I didn't mention, and some of you guys are going to scream, "Oh, Luciano Pavarotti, what about Pavarotti?" And I'm like, I don't like it. This is unpopular opinion, and y'all are going to hate me, but Pavarotti smells like a patchouli fragrance with vomit in the middle of it. It's so sickly sweet with the honey. It just gives me this nauseous feeling. Like, I don't feel nauseous when I smell it, but when I smell it, I feel like I'm smelling someone else's yak. Like, the Pavarotti just makes me feel like I'm smelling someone else's upchuck, mixed with patchouli and other things, and it's not pleasant, you know? So, you guys who love it, you're allowed to love it, but just please don't wear it around me. It's not my favorite patchouli fragrance by a long shot. So, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will catch you next time.